Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kill, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Well, hello. I started to say good morning, but you might not be listening to this in the morning. You could be listening to it on your afternoon commute. Thanks for tuning in, listening here. I was sitting here, Tony, and I've thought several weeks, grab your cup of coffee, and we never have coffee here.
No, I'm not a coffee drinker.
And then I saw you reach into the candy bowl. And after our discussion an episode or two ago about all the sticky candy, did you fix the sticky candy situation?
No.
So if I reach in there, there's a chance I'll pull out 12 pieces.
There is, but if you dig down to the bottom, I think that it's been insulated from the heat. It's like a cooler down there.
Oh, that's funny. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing good. A little overcome with allergies.
Oh my goodness.
It's allergy season, and it's hitting pretty hard.
It's ramped back up. We're kind of middle of September recording this episode, and it felt like it had gone away. And then now this Northeast Tennessee, and I know we've said this before, but I remember, good gracious, 20 years ago, seeing some article that Northeast Tennessee, we really don't have earthquakes. We don't really have tornadoes. We definitely live too far from like the ocean to have hurricanes. When you start looking at all of what are considered natural disasters, we have none of those. It's gorgeous living here. You get 4 seasons. I mean, you get a true summer, fall, winter, and spring. But it was the number one in this article, it was the number 1 or number 2 place for allergies in the entire country,
the entire world.
It might be. I mean, but this was just for the country. But like it is, I don't know what it is. We have this beautiful surrounding of mountains, and it is gorgeous here. If you are not from Northeast Tennessee, highly recommend coming in. This is a good window. Storytelling Festival is coming up soon in Jonesboro. Literally, I remember being in college getting my graphic design degree and reading books and the authors going, places you should visit to inspire your creativity. And the number one thing sometimes was the Jonesboro Storytelling Festival. I mean, it is just, international. The Storytelling Center.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Yeah,
it's crazy, but it is absolutely gorgeous. But it is like these mountains just surround it, and somehow though it is just a funnel of pollen.
And I thought that you were for a minute there doing a plug for the East Tennessee Visitors Bureau or something like that.
Oh, I don't know, man. It is gorgeous here. It's crazy.
It really is. Yeah, I have a friend who does a podcast that talks about different places to go and will do podcasts for different visitors bureaus and tourism associations for their community. And I thought maybe that's what we were jumping into.
I'm in. Let's do that. Let's have that.
But then you ruined it with the allergies.
Allergies, man. You don't want to come here for allergies. That's what we need to start telling everybody, because we are like attracting all kinds of people. Lots of big city, like West Coasters who want to get to the East Coast and
New Yorkers,
small, like much lower cost of living, slower pace of life, all of those things. Because it's crazy. I mean, I'll go to Knoxville, just even to Knoxville, which is only an hour and a half away. And you get down there in the traffic and stuff, and you're just going, I mean, just go to Buc-ee's. You don't have to get in the Knoxville. You can go to
Buc-ee's.
Well, it's amazing. But we got to have Justin Nava back on so we can share the Buc-ee's camaraderie. But it's one of those things of like, you go to Buc-ee's, it can take 3 hours to get out of the parking lot at the wrong time. Terrible setup for the one in Sevierville, or Kodak, wherever it's at. But it is, I mean, traffic here is just people like, oh man, traffic was terrible. And I'm like, it took you 8 minutes to make a 6-minute drive. Like, I think you'll be all right. It'll live. But I mean, you can just sit sometimes and just go, I'm going to be here forever, just going 2 miles. And even in Knoxville, I can't imagine how bad Atlanta and New York and stuff is now, because I haven't really been there in a while.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's moving here except for pastors.
Churches everywhere need a pastor.
Everywhere. Man, we've got 3 that we're trying to find help for right now. And there's nobody wanting a job, it seems like.
And I know today, and this may be a weird transition to our topic, but like, do you think there's some of that this idea that the Bible Belt and churches have this, like, is it fair to say broken mentality sometimes of how the church should function? It's like, well, my mama did it this way and her daddy did it this way. And like, the church has functioned this way for so long that, I mean, I'm being from the South, we used to sing "Give Me That Old Time Religion." It was a good hymn that we would sing. I don't know if they sang that in Vegas or not.
No, we didn't sing that one.
But it was like, literally there was a verse that was like, if it was good for Paul and Silas, it's good enough for me. There was a verse that, it was good for mom and daddy. It was good enough for me. It'll take us all to heaven. It's good enough for me. I mean, like, this old time religion. And I think
Is this a song you sang in church?
Literally, it was a song. And I'm telling you, like, I don't love the word deconstruction. Is that the word everybody's deconstructing? I like the word detox a little bit more. It's really been, some of my AA friends are like, you're just going through a spiritual AA. Like that, you are literally just detoxing yourself. When I sit with my friends who are following Jesus and asking questions and things, and I go and I'm like, man, I'm struggling. And I think at times it's really probably hard on the congregation I lead. I shouldn't say my congregation, they're not that, but the congregation I lead in this season, because there are just days where it's like that stuff ramps back up. And it's just like, let's do Bring a Friend Sunday. And I'm going, this is just not, I mean, this old time religion, this way I was brought up in church, this very traditional model. I have no problem with tradition. Like, I literally follow the teachings of a guy that's 2,000 years old from a book that has got, several thousand years on it. So I'm fine with tradition. I'm fine with those types of things. But sometimes it's just really crazy stepping in and trying to detox from the things that are things of Jesus, things of Scripture, things of God the Father, and things of the insert denomination that you followed or you were a part of, or the church you were in here, that they had just set up as traditions that were just, it felt right to them. They had some loose scripture that fit that mold, and then went from there.
Yeah, for me, it was a real shock when I moved here.
Oh, I bet.
In the mid 90s for college, because we were a family that was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night church. My dad either worked in the church or was in leadership in the church my whole life. And so we were completely ingrained in church, but it was a very different experience than here. And so when I go from spending my whole life in fast growing, moving, progressive churches on the West Coast to coming here and in the middle of the Bible Belt and experiencing really for the first time a traditional church, I was blown away. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing and seeing and facing. And I had never held a hymnal before.
Oh, wow.
I can remember going into a church and people just standing up. No one said it's time to stand, but everyone that had gone to that church for 45 years just knew that this is the part of the service where we're going to stand. We're going to say this thing, and then we're going to sit back down. And then 2 songs later, we're going to stand again and we're going to sit back down. And everyone just knew exactly what to do. And I'm sitting there, I was a fish out of water. I had no clue. Some of it amazed me. I loved a lot of the reverence that came out of it. I loved a lot of the tradition and holiness, it felt like, of what was taking place in a lot of the churches, but I just didn't know it. I didn't understand it. And still to this day, having been here for 20 years almost now, there's still a lot that a song about
old time religion,
I don't know, but My wife and I just had this conversation the other day. One of the songs that we sang in church camp growing up that she had never heard before. Did you do the hug a friend's neck, hug a neck next to you? Yeah. She'd never heard that one before. Yeah.
The songs and things from camps and stuff like that. It's just weird when I think back on those, and I'm going, could you imagine bringing those back to youth group today? And because, the thing is, you do those at camp and then you'd end up transitioning those songs back to your youth group or something. And of course, it didn't have quite the same meaning when you've got 20 people in a youth group and you had 2,000 people at a camp. But it is crazy. Yeah. So the whole, I'm just, this song, you've got me thinking now, I had to look it up, but like the whole thing is just give me that old time religion. It repeats that 3 times. It's like, it's good enough for me. It was good for my old mother is one. It was good for the Hebrew children. It was good for Paul and Silas. And then they go back to give me that old time religion. They just start repeating it. It's just, I want that old time religion. It was good for my old father. They go back to repeating the Hebrew children. And I'm just thinking about this now because I was singing this song when I was a little kid. And I don't like thinking about this now. Like, man, we were following really like we were following like Jesus, like in his model. We weren't really following the Levitical.
I was going to say they want to go back to the days of the tabernacle.
I'm just going like, this is nuts.
The sacrificial system.
Yes. I literally have not looked at this song in probably 30 years and, or something. I mean, and I just don't think about it. And I didn't even know all the different things, but somebody out here is
back in the days of the worship wars, which I think those have pretty much subsided now. But back in the days of the worship wars, one of the big arguments was that the newer worship songs, the theology was so bad. Yeah. You just ruined it with that song.
I did. I know. And I mean, you want to know what's hilarious? If you had to take a guess on who wrote Old Time, it's OLE, Old Time Religion.
I'm going to say the Gaithers.
No, not someone that I would equate to Christian music or gospel, maybe gospel-ish, but it'd be very loose. Not Elvis, but
Johnny
it would
Cash.
be Elvis, and it'd be Elvis and Johnny adjacent. I think we could guess for an hour, and you might would get it eventually because you're a smart guy. B.B. King.
B.B. King. Wow.
I would have never in a million years. I don't know that I would have ever guessed B.B. King.
B.B. King wrote your old time.
Old time.
You sure it's the B.B. King or is it a different B.B. King?
It's got a picture over here.
Beatrice Betty King.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's anyway, I mean, it's no, it's the B.B. King. Yeah.
People are deconstructing our show right now.
I'm just saying, this is the thing. And then the conversation that we're having today is around staffing your church. And we wonder why in the South, and I'm sure it's everywhere else as well, people have a hard time getting staff for their church. But if I showed up at a church and that song started popping up a couple weeks later by the music person, we would have to have a conversation.
Are you out or are you in?
Oh, I'd be.
Does that solidify that this is the church for you, or does it have you looking for?
I don't see. I think what I would rather do is if I had, let's say that somehow the wool was over my eyes and I just didn't see it clearly. And that's a bad way to say that. That makes it feel like they were shady and I was, some pure innocent sheep and wolf, in here trying to devour me. But if I had gone in and just somehow not caught on, I mean, I'm going to a church that's going to sing hymns. I'm going to a church that sings a style of music that I'm absolutely okay with, that I'm good. I'm coming in here. And then songs like that start popping up. I would try and use it as teachable moments. I think what would end up happening is if I push back on a song that was good enough for mama, good for my old father, good for the Hebrew children, and I'm pushing back on it, they're seeing it as gospel. And I'm saying that this isn't what Jesus set up. And I think that it ended up costing me my job. So I would probably try and double down and lead well through it, but I would definitely have some conversations. I would be if that was a song they were going to continue to sing, I would be out, because I just don't think that's weird to leave a church over a song. But I would say there's a deeper theological thing going on there. If you're having that conversation, I would say there's layers and layers and layers that you're getting to.
But then on the other side of that, I think there are people out there that are desperately looking for something that reminds them of how it used to be. And so if they can find a church, and I've had this conversation with several church leaders over the last month or so, is that there are people out there that are looking for exactly what you're offering. There are people out there that don't want flashy lights and loud music and fog machines. And there are people that this is exactly what they're longing for and looking for. You have to figure out how you let those people know that you're here.
Well, we've talked about this before, though. There's Unicoi County is a little over 17,000 people. And that encompasses several areas, Irwin being one of those. Our church is in Irwin. So 17,000 people in Unicoi County. There are like 83 churches. And that I'm aware of, there is us and one other church that have what would be considered a full contemporary. And one of the churches doesn't, unless they've added some people, they don't have a full band. It's a person with a guitar. Sometimes they have a drummer, and then they play some tracks and things with it to fill in other instruments and things. But like that I'm aware of, we're the only church that would be considered a contemporary church. There's another church, pretty big church in our town, that still has a full choir and orchestra, and they do contemporary. They have, guitars and, like a true orchestra. I mean, with brass and woodwinds and things like that. And they are amazing, and they are so good. But I would call that blended. I wouldn't call that a real contemporary service. But outside of them, we're talking 3 churches, so 80 churches, and that I'm aware of, probably at least 70 to 75 of those churches are somebody at a piano singing from a hymnal every Sunday. And those churches still, maybe they have 10, 15 people, maybe they have 60, 70 people. But those churches every Sunday open their doors with somebody who goes up, stands in the pulpit and preaches the Bible. And I'm just, you're right. I mean, people want that. And this is a town that, like I said, I started thinking that, First Christians, a few other churches, they have some guys with guitars and things like that. And I'm not saying like we sing some hymns, not as often at all, but we sing hymns occasionally. But like, I mean, I'm talking churches that have a guitar that are kind of moved away from the piano organ setup, that organs that aren't a B3. I mean, we're 80 some churches, and we're talking 75 of them still function like the churches I grew up in small towns in Alabama and Virginia when I was a kid. And again, not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just like, there's people who want that. It's, I just wonder songs about, like old time religion. I love B.B. King, great musician, great singer, killer guitar player. But, I don't know how much theology he was putting in.
Yeah, I'm not either. I would say we should have him on, but that would be a little difficult to do.
That would be impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing, then we'll go. Something popped up on my feed the other day and have you seen this, that Elvis is still alive and functioning as a pastor?
No.
And like people have taken and done these overlays of these 2 guys' faces. And I mean, it is I'm talking
Wouldn't Elvis be like 105 by now?
He died at 40 years old in 77, 40, 41, 42, something like that. So, I was born in 75 and I'm 48, almost 49. And so he would be 90 something. Yeah, he has definitely held up well if he's still alive. I mean, I'm talking like well.
And
like
is Tupac his associate pastor, his worship leader?
That would be fantastic. And yeah, I'm trying to think who are the other people that everybody's always like that they're still alive and around. Michael Jackson,
yeah.
Prince. I mean, you get these guys that they just kind of go, look, when you get to be as famous as the people that we're talking about are, if you wanted to disappear, you would have to like fake your own death and do things. You're like, but this guy showed up to Elvis's kid's wedding and had no reason to. Okay. But like it's like he tunes his guitar the same way Elvis tuned his guitar.
You know, we talk a lot about how to grow this show, how to reach new people with this show.
This is probably not it.
No, I'm thinking if we want to go down this conspiracy theory road, I think that there's room for that. We're starting the new podcast next week. We'll have two podcasts now: the Small Church podcast and Is Elvis Still Alive? And I mean, we could dive deep into that. You know, there's a deep dive in that I think people would tune in and listen to. So let us know in the comments if that's something that you're interested in, and we will not do that.
Yeah, Bob Joyce is the guy's name. If you want to go down a deep dive, Joyce.
Bob Joyce.
Yeah. Y is in yellow. Sometimes my Y's and I's start to sound a lot alike. But Bob Joyce, if you want to get
AKA
Elvis
Presley.
Thank you very much. So,
we're wanting to talk about staffing today. We spent 20 some odd minutes of our show talking about Elvis, and I'm not sure what we've actually talked about, but we're wanting to talk about staffing today. And we had a good segue that was going with that. And then we got off onto other stuff that was just as important. We do see, I'm working with 3 different churches right now that are all looking for staff and cannot find staff. And yet we've got other churches that are wanting to hire staff, and their leadership won't get on board with hiring staff because they don't think it's the proper move. And so there's this issue of staffing just that are in a lot of the churches that we're working with here locally, and also just seeing it all over the place that staffing is a major issue. Staffing is a point of contention amongst leaderships. What do we do with our staffing? You've got some churches that desperately want to grow. I have one church that I met with earlier this week that I don't know how, but they're wanting to hire 2 different staff people right now. And I spoke for this church just a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know how they could afford a part-time person, much less 2 full-time people that they're wanting to hire. But they see the need. They want to grow. They want to do things within their community. And so the people of the church are willing to take some risks and some chances and dig deep and pony up. And they want to hire 2 people. Problem is we can't find anyone who wants to go there. And then I've got another church that I was at a couple weeks ago that met with their leadership or their lead pastor, and they're doing really, really well. They're doing exceptionally well by all the metrics that we'll get into later in this show. They are at least 1.5, if not 2 FTEs understaffed, full-time equivalent staff people understaffed. And their lead pastor has people that he's interested in, but the leadership won't go for it. They don't think that they need it. And they think that the one staff person that they have should be able to handle everything that they're doing. And so you've got both sides of the spectrum there. You've got some churches that are sitting here looking, do we or don't we? And then you've got others that are desperately wanting to and can't find anyone to come. And it's just an issue that we're seeing that almost probably 50% of the conversations that I'm having with church leaders are centered around this idea of staffing. And so we want to kind of dive into that a little bit on this episode. And we think that this is probably going to be a multi-part episode. So
we'll see. We took 20 minutes talking about Elvis, so that may get us to a 2-part just there.
It might be a 4-parter if we keep talking about Tupac and
BB
Prince
King
and yeah.
So yeah, and so I guess so here's a couple thoughts. I guess, and you can kind of like, what do you see as some of the challenges for, like, so let's step away from some of the situations you're in with some small churches and kind of, you mentioned a couple of scenarios there, but what's some other challenges that are kind of popping up and around that you're seeing with, because you do this a lot more than the vast majority of us do. You speak half the year ish. I mean, you speak at least, I would say 20, 25 times a year. Well, more than that, because you do Sunday nights and Wednesdays and stuff as well. So, I mean, you probably average almost once a week throughout the year. If you look at some of the rhythms you get in of going for 2 or 3 weeks and speaking 3 or 4 times a week, some of those weeks. So you see a lot of this. What's some of the typical staffing challenges that you're seeing in small churches that that are creating some tensions?
I think the biggest issue that we're seeing in small churches is nobody wants to go to small churches. It used to be that the way that things worked is when you graduated from Bible college or seminary, really when you went to Bible college or seminary, you would get a job in a small church and you would get your feet wet in that small church. You would learn what ministry is really like. Now we go to Bible college and seminary and we don't work at all. The vast majority of the students who are going into Bible college and seminary don't get their first taste of ministry work until they do their required internship after their junior year. Or later, even. Sometimes they'll find a way to sneak around to that, and it's not until they get out. And then when they're graduating, they don't want a job in a small church. We have so many small churches that pay pretty decently, give you an opportunity to get in and start preaching and teaching immediately, be loved by a congregation, learn all of the insides and outsides of the local church, leadership and how to do all of that. Have full capacity to create your programming and what you want to do, and they don't want it. The pattern now is to try to get an internship or an understudy at a large church somewhere, or get on board as an intern or intro staff position at a mega church, a large church somewhere. And I've had the conversation with guys who are getting ready to graduate from Bible college and seminary so many times over the last few years, where I've sat down with them and said, we've got this church that would be great. I said, no, I really think that I'm going to hold off for this, that I would really rather get a job. And so you want to get a job where you're never getting the opportunity to preach. You want to be a lead pastor someday. And the only teaching opportunities that you're going to get in this job that you're going to take is in leading a small group. You're going to be doing clerical work. You're going to be sitting in meeting after meeting after meeting, not working with people. But that's what you would rather do because you see it as a quicker pipeline to the job that you want.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I probably ended up in a really kind of unique space. We just always attended bigger churches when I was a kid. The church my dad pastored, but he pastored smaller churches, and for many reasons, we'd be there a couple of months, then we wouldn't be. We'd be there a few months, and then we wouldn't be. We just weren't in churches a long time when he pastored. Again, smaller churches, but the church we really attended was a big church, hundreds of people in a small town in Alabama. Moved to Virginia, attended a church that probably seated 600 in a town of 4,000 people, and it was standing room only most Sunday mornings. Moved to Georgia and ended up attending the church I attended when I was down there was 2,000 or 3,000 people. Ended up going on staff as a youth middle school pastor with the youth ministry staff at a church that was running 2,000 or 3,000 in Sunday school. I mean, it was those types of churches. And then of course the first full-time church was still a church of 300-400 people at a minimum. Might have been 4 or 5. I don't even remember right now. And so but now I'm at the smallest church I've ever been at. I mean, I was another church that was 750, another church that was 1,500. And I'm on staff at the smallest church I've ever been on staff at. And, we're a little less than 100 people. And it is definitely different ministry. And you and I were talking about this right before the show. I am learning things every day about how to love people well, because when you're in a bigger church, one of the things that I'll say is that, and you might disagree with this and you can push back on this. I'm not saying that there's not good ministry happening. I'm saying that a lot of people attract people. When you've got something that has a buzz and an energy around it, it attracts people to it. And when you're in a smaller church, if you're going to grow, I think you've got to figure out how to do discipleship. You've got to figure out how to sit with people, how to handle conflict. You're at a church of 3, 4, 5, 10,000 people, and one person gets mad and leaves because they didn't like the way you handled a situation. Well, unless those people are the mayor or, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, they're probably not destroying your church. You're going to have 5 new families show up that replace them the next week. And I'm not saying that's okay or that it's wrong. People leave churches. That's life. But there is something about this small church mentality that people need, like, learn so much. Again, almost 50, and I'm pushing myself and growing in ways that I thought I was really good at. I thought I was really good at certain areas of ministry, and I'm finding that I was good at those areas when there was a lot of people and I was managing people who actually were doing the ministry, not me doing the ministry. I had, 35, 45 small group leaders. Well, I was meeting with them once a week. Their high level capacity, they're going to do in the ministry. So I agree with you 100%. There's so much that needs to happen in this space of how do people start to serve. I didn't go to Bible college. I've never been to Bible college, other than a bunch of online classes that I just take for fun. But I didn't go to Bible college right out of high school. Actually didn't finish my degree till I was almost 40. I got into ministry, and so it just happened. And in that space, I had to learn some things the hard way with a lot of life. But I was a youth pastor. We're talking senior pastor roles with some of this stuff, but I was a youth pastor, student ministry of 20 people, and I preached, I taught, I did those things 3 times a week. And it was me sitting in front of people in a stand up, in a sit in circles, and then a sit around a table. I mean, it was very different thoughts and ideas, and I had to learn to do those things. I had to build relationships with those kids, with those leaders, and that was a big difference in I think how I learned how to do ministry and stuff. And it really has helped throughout the years.
Yeah. I think another big issue that we see in the churches that we get the opportunity to be a part of is the challenge of whether or not we are staffing for growth or staffing just for survival. Are we just trying to maintain and keep our doors open, or are we really trying to grow? And one of the biggest identifiers of that is how you're approaching staffing.
Yeah. I mean, are you looking for somebody to fill a role? Are you looking for somebody to, the question is like, this is really hard. Like, are most churches really looking for somebody to challenge the status quo on things? Like I've been around churches that like they see somebody with a ton of charisma and they're just like, oh my goodness, we got to have that person. And I've seen that person be good, but more times than not, when you grab somebody because of charisma, like, oh, hey, they're attending our church here, we've got to grab them, they got a ton of personality. I've seen that be a dumpster fire way more than I've seen it be something that was super successful and led the church down a really, really good path. And I think that when you're staffing just because somebody's got charisma or somebody's got a big personality, like you're trying to draw people for the wrong reasons. And like finding someone who is willing to sit, who's willing to help people be disciples that make disciples. And that's a hard metric sometimes, unless somebody's living that out and you're seeing it. Like our network, we've got this one guy, and I think everybody on our staff would say it's possibly the best disciple maker we've ever known. Several of us do say that. And I mean, this guy it's unbelievable. He literally was a janitor for a while, and he would come in every week, and people were just coming to Christ. People were coming to know, by the way, I'm not saying anything about being a janitor. He was just cleaning. He wasn't pastoring, and he would just walk through. Sometimes he'd be cleaning churches. And like he'd be discipling the pastors, going, I just don't know what to do. He'd meet random people in an office building, and he just has 2 or 3 questions that he asks. And like you can go to restaurants that he goes to with him, and people are just, oh man, okay. From a distance, I can watch that guy, and I can go, okay, if I need a pastor and that's somebody I'm wanting to hire, if I'm looking to hire and I want a pastor, that's a guy that I've seen him live it out. I think discipleship is something that's hard because most of us say we do it, but I think very few of us do. And so hiring for growth versus staffing for growth versus staffing for survival. I think most of us live in survival mode because it's how do we keep the doors open? And that's through attraction.
Two different church leadership groups that I've met with in the past 3 weeks that two very different scenarios. One of them I told you about before, and they're the perfect example of this. You've got one church that's a very small church. They don't have anyone on staff right now. Their elders are leading everything, doing everything, and then we're helping with some of the preaching and teaching throughout the weeks. They want to hire not only one, but 2 full-time staff people. I don't know how they have the money. They say they do. We've talked through with them budget, what that looks like, what it would take to hire these 2 positions that they want financially. And while it would stretch them, they are willing to do that because they say, we think we need this. On the other hand, we've got another church that is probably at least double, I would say triple the attendance of this church that wants to hire 2 staff people. They had a couple of years ago, they had someone connected to their church pass away and left the church a big sum of money. They have a lot of money there. Now, it's not an exorbitant amount of money, but it's enough to pay for the full salary of a full-time lead pastor for probably a year and a half. Okay. So if they had brought nothing in, just with that amount right there, a year and a half, they will not even consider hiring a full-time senior minister. They want a part-time person because they just don't think that the church can afford it. But when you talk to them about everything that they want, everything that they need, everything that they're desiring, it's not something that a part-time person can do. But they're in survival mode versus growth mode. They think we have to hold on to our money. We have to play it safe. And if we bring in a part-time person and we grow, then our hope is that we could make them full-time eventually at some point in time if we grow. Even though all of the metrics, they have the money right there. Sure, is it a risk to do that? And if you stay the same, then you're spending that money, but that money wasn't theirs, right? Now, it's not like that's money that had come in through their tithes and offerings. It was a gift that was given to them when someone passed, that they left it to the church. But they're not willing to take that chance. Survival is necessary, okay? In a church, survival is necessary, but growth is intentional. You have to be intentional about it. The problem is many churches find themselves stuck in survival mode without realizing that it's holding them back from fulfilling their greater purpose and mission.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things you're talking about there is that in the churches, in the situations of the churches that you're talking about, they have no staff members or they've got one staff member and need to add a couple. We're always encouraged. And again, we're 3 campuses. Every one of us is told you need to be replacing yourself. You need to be looking. And a lot of times those people don't replace us. They end up being the staff at the next campus or something along those lines, or they leave us and go to another church. Not in a bad way. I mean, we're still very connected and we love them and we hang out, but God opened some doors and we weren't ready to plant. They're ready to be on staff and here we go. But it's bringing people along in doing that. But when you're in a church, the situation of what you're talking about here, my assumption is, totally assuming I wouldn't know any of these churches. I couldn't say their names if I had to. We don't talk about the names of the churches a lot because those are kind of private, confidential meetings. Most of them are congregations that are probably 55, 60 and up. Again, I'm assuming they're probably less than 30 people. A lot of times, one of them you said was pretty large, so maybe it's 120 people, maybe it's 100, 120 people. And there's this there's nobody to reproduce in there. There's nobody showing up. If you've got a pastor who's going, okay, I'm 60, I'm going to do this for 5 more years and I'm going to move back to Missouri and be a granddad and serve part-time volunteer at a church. I mean, it's just these things of I just don't think people have the people around them to reproduce. So you have to go outside and hire. This Paul mentality of being a tent maker is not something that a lot of people are interested in. And I'm going to say a lot, not all. I've got several friends, I know you do as well, who are intentionally bivocational. They do not want a full-time or sometimes some of them any salary from their church. And so the question kind of comes down to of like this tent maker mentality of people being willing to come in and do this. But then you said something I really hadn't even thought about. And again, this is where you do this more than me. Like colleges aren't putting these kids into smaller churches to where they're learning some skill sets like hands-on. They're putting them into bigger churches and those kids are going in and sitting under somebody and watching them make decisions and hoping they learn it like Garfield by osmosis, just putting the book on their head instead of having to pick the book up and put it into action. And I hadn't thought about that. And those are complicated scenarios for these churches and organizations to be in.
It really is. Robert, how do you know if a church is staffing for survival or staffing for growth?
That's a hard thing. And I don't know that I'm in a lot of conversations about staffing with other churches and stuff. So here's just kind of some things that I've seen in churches that I've been in that have changed staff positions, and we've hired and we've done things where, or somebody that maybe I'm really, really close to that took a job, and some of the questions and things they were asked and what that was put into. I think one of the things, if you're hiring for growth, I think you hire people sometimes who challenge the system. And a lot of churches don't like that. I mean, they want somebody to come in and go, look, we've survived. Again, survival. We've survived. We've done this for 100 years now. And we need A, B, C, and D. And I know one church that was looking for a pastor. And I mean, this is a church of less than 50 people. And it was a mandatory that the pastor that they were going to hire had a doctorate. And I'm just telling you, they weren't paying enough for one person to go in there and probably be okay, just, normal salary. If I've gone to school for, 10 years, is something like that, to get a doctorate and all those pieces that come with it, there's a level of expectation with pay that comes with that also. And they were doing these things and they were hiring people. And it was just something of like, we've got this standard that we want. And because we have this standard, we will succeed. And so it started to limit the pool, and people who push back on their thoughts, push back on their system, they started to challenge those things. Those people, I just happen to know some people on the hiring process, they got written off really quick. And so I think for me, one of the big things has been, and I'd be interested to hear kind of things you've seen a little bit more too. That like one of the big things has been somebody not rude, not arrogant, but willing to push back on and lead aggressively, and not scared of challenging the systems, the sacred cows that have been there for forever.
Yeah. I think some of the big things to look at if you are trying to discern, are we staffing for survival or staffing for growth, is first, when's the last time that you've hired someone? If it's been, you can't remember the last time that you hired someone, then you're staffing for survival. You're just keeping the things that are in place. Does a staffing decision, does it make you uncomfortable? If it makes you uncomfortable, if you're thinking, I just don't know that this is the right move, I don't know that we can afford to do this, I don't know that our church can handle this, then it's probably a good sign that you're staffing for growth rather than staffing for survival. And as you're looking at the job description of who you're trying to hire, are you hiring for things that are already being done, or are you hiring for things that you want to do? Because if you're hiring for things that are already being done and you just need someone to come in and take those over so that you're not doing them anymore, or you're replacing someone else who is doing those leaving, then you're just simply staffing for survival. We're keeping things going the way that they're doing. But if you have this long list of things that you would love for your church to be doing, you would love to be doing in your community and in the lives of your people, but you just don't have the resources to do it, and so you're hiring for things that you would like to be doing, then that's a sign that you're staffing for growth. If you're looking at your job descriptions and you're staffing and it's simply just things that are already being done, then I think that's a pretty good sign that you're staffing for survival.
That's an interesting thought about what you said along the lines of when was the last time you hired somebody? And I may actually get you to unpack that a little bit, because I'm thinking through. So mentally, are you saying, like for me mentally, I'm trying to process through this. Are you saying if a church hasn't hired somebody in a long time, that they've just like left, they've left the space empty, they've filled it in themselves, or they've just kind of moved along the process and now they're going, man, we're not going to make it if we don't get somebody to do the things that we're currently doing, because we're not going to live forever? Is it that type of mentality, or is there something more to that?
I think there's both. I think both. I think that, a lot of times churches will just go along. They'll just status quo, just keep it going. It's comfortable. We've got this going. And then as people get older, they begin to say, yeah, we really need someone who's going to take this over. But I think the other standpoint is you've got churches that they're doing fine. They're doing just fine. They're content. They're happy with what they're doing. And they've had the same 1.5 staff people, maybe a senior minister and a part-time office person, or a senior minister and a part-time youth minister, that they've had the same exact positions for 40 years. And they've done nothing different. Whenever they hire someone new, when their part-time youth person leaves, they have the same job description. They're looking to just keep the same programs going. Let's just change the name. Let's just change the name tag that we're giving and find someone else to come in and keep the things going. Then I think that your church is stagnant. I think that maybe it's time to look and say, what are some new things that we can be doing to continue to expand and grow our reach and expand the kingdom of God in our community and beyond. And so if you find yourself simply just in your hiring process, looking to hire for things that are already being done, I think that you're just in survival mode.
I remember one church I worked at that, and again, I was stupid young. I would not hire me if I could look back, and I wouldn't hire me as young as I was. But this church had always been youth group, and it was in that era in the late 90s, early 2000s that I'm sure you remember a little bit, because I know you were doing student ministry there as well, where it was like we're getting away from, groups are just people who hang out. Ministries are on a mission. And so so all youth pastors in a lot of circles were really making this transition from being, higher youth group to higher youth ministries and higher student ministries or something like that. And it was those types of things. And I remember I made that shift over 6 or 7 month period. I was at this church a little less than 3 years. And as soon as I left, the first thing that they did was rip down anything that said student ministry and go right back to youth group. I was probably wrong in my approach, because you and I both know that saying youth group versus student ministry isn't what changes the mentality. It's the heart and the direction and the leadership of what's going on there. And so I could have led under a very different, we could have called it children's ministry and been fine. I mean, it wasn't the thing, but also I would say there was a tension of, we've always done it this way. It was good enough for the previous youth pastor. It's good enough for me.
Yeah.
We've created this mantra, this thing, and we want to be, this whole mentality. And so I think there's two parts of that. There was probably some immaturity on me. Again, as a very young 20-year-old going, oh, this is what all of my buddies are doing. This seems to make sense. Oh, I totally get that. Being on mission, not just being a group that huddles up. But then, this mentality of the church of going literally almost as soon as I was out the door. Again, I wasn't on staff there anymore. They didn't owe me anything. I was fine. But almost as soon as I got out the door, switching back to that, it was just going, we're claiming back our ground. And I think that's the tension inside of this space that a lot of churches are going. It's like we're trying to claim our ground, and we don't want somebody coming in and moving the yard markers. We're happy with 3rd and 3 or, or first, or, 3rd and 10. We're happy with that thing at that distance. We've been grinding 3rd and 10 for a whole lot of years. We'll get there eventually, instead of getting up there and going, hey, what if we could have 4th and 1? Like, what if we could get a little bit closer and we're really on the front lines fighting for that next set of down markers to where we can move the kingdom forward. And so, again, I think there was a ton of immaturity on my part. I also think that there's just a lot to be said, though, for the fact of how a lot of churches function. And I think it's interesting, too, because I'm thinking through the people who listen to our podcast, and we have some people, I'm sure, that are larger churches that are just going, okay, there's some tensions and struggles that we face when we're hiring in. Maybe some of them are going, we do that college intern thing. I maybe need to look at that a little bit differently. There's some churches that are probably considered a touch more traditional. And I said earlier, I don't say that in a bad way. I love how I was brought up. I really wouldn't change it for anything. There's some things personally I wish I would have grown more in, but that was on me, not on anybody there. And I love how I was cared for and brought through the process. But churches that are a touch more traditional, that are facing some of the things you're talking about. But then I think about the people who are maybe in a situation like a church style like I'm in, that would be considered a touch more contemporary or modern or whatever trendy word we're using this week. So I'm not smart enough or hip enough to keep up, but a church that kind of sits in that space, and they've got themselves, they're meeting in their garage or a storefront, or I knew this one guy that literally they met in a funeral home, and they did their services in a funeral home. And so you're meeting in all these spaces, and you're there, and it's you with a guitar player. And Northridge the church I'm a part of started in a karate studio with one guy on a guitar, and his wife was the singer. He sings, he's amazing. And she was singing with him. And we happened to be in town for a couple, 3 weeks while we were waiting on our youngest son to be born before we moved off to go work at a church in another state. And I played bass for him. And there was 25 people there. It was just these spaces of that, and the churches that are sitting in this, that are brand new church plants. So I think this church staffing thing, it really hits 3 or 4 different spaces that I would be intrigued how each person's processing this, and how we can speak into all those spaces too, if they had questions, and what we can do with that.
I think a really simple way to state it would be that staffing for survival is reactive. Mm-hmm. Staffing for growth is proactive. And that's a pretty simple way to put it.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing for me, is where I'm looking at right now. Like, we just had a situation where, like, we really wanted to hire somebody. And I appreciate what you said earlier. For us, look, we've already got 3 staff members. We've got 1 full-time, 2 part-time. We were looking at adding another part-time person, again, with a church of less than 100 people. And I don't know, I'm looking at the outline here. I know we're a little ways away from getting to some of those metrics, but that you would even say we're probably pushing, like, looking at our numbers and where we are week in, week out and things like that. With the 3 staff members, we're probably pushing some of the financial metrics of what would be there. And so adding a 4th person, as much as we wanted to add that person in who would have overseen student ministry for us, and done some discipleship things and stuff as well. Very talented young man. Like, he is going to absolutely kill it at a church somewhere. He is amazing, amazing, amazing. And we were very disheartened that we couldn't. But we sat down one day, just went, this isn't financially a wise decision. And I had somebody post recently, a friend of mine posted on social media. I would say that he's, a lot like me, can be a little disgruntled with, just the thinking of church sometimes. And he just said the tension for the church right now is that they do not give or do anything that seems outside of their norm until their canals are full, and they only give out of it once they start to overflow. And he was quoting some book, and I don't remember the book and stuff right now, but like, I think that's the tension. Is I feel like that for us, we already, like, when it comes to staffing and it comes to some things, we're already at an overflow. We're already giving out of the canal, not out of the overflow. And so that was unwise. But how do you bring people along, like you said, and kind of staff in that space of who are people who are very motivated volunteers that you can bring alongside you, disciple them, and do. Is there a college close by that does have some kids who need some hours? How do you connect with that college to where you can bring some volunteers in? And then maybe some of those, as you disciple them and lead them and work with them, the church maybe grows and benefits from them, and there's somebody that comes on staff down the road. But no, I love what you said there, the reactive versus, proactive kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's the struggle, is that just in our immediate area, and I know that we're in a very unique area.
We are.
That just within an hour and a half of where we're at, we have 4 Bible colleges or seminaries. And I have spoken to people high up in all of them saying, hey,
you attended one of them. But just recently with all of these staffing needs that we have in some of our smaller churches, I've spoken with people saying we desperately need people. We need someone just simply, do you have a student who would love to just, not even a job, can they fill a pulpit for a weekend? We have a couple churches coming up that need a couple weeks filled, that they don't, we're trying to help them find someone. And the person who's been doing that is going on vacation, and I'm somewhere else that weekend. And our heaven
other
forbid
person
somebody be allowed to take a vacation.
Right. Yeah. And so we've exhausted all of our people that we normally put in for what's called supply preaching. And so I reached out. Do you even have, forget that I've talked to them multiple times saying, do you have anybody who wants a job, pays well, especially for a college kid? Limited, requirements, the responsibility. It's not a full-time position, but they can get paid well and get great experience and growth. Forget that. Do you just have someone who will come and preach a stinking sermon? Doesn't even have to be good. The people don't even care if it's good. They just need someone to come and do it Sunday morning.
Take their homiletics lesson that they've got to prepare this week and just teach it.
Come and do it. And we can't even find someone to come do that stuff. So
that's crazy to me, because the thing, sorry to cut you off there. Sorry, finish your thought.
No, that was it. I was just saying, okay. I think it's really difficult because we've got 4 schools within an hour and a half radius of where we're at, and we cannot find.
And if we're being really transparent, 3 of those schools are within 30 minutes or less.
30 minutes, yeah.
And there's one that's a little bit of an outlier, good school, but like just a little bit of an outlier. That's the thing that's been an interesting thing for me watching. And I'm very proud of my kids. And I don't really wear dad goggles a lot because I'm aware because I see them and I'm going, yeah, you said you want to do this, but I also know how much time you put in on this. But our oldest is a talented musician. Like it's insane how hard he works and what he does. But he's in a music program at a college in our area here, and he is he doesn't read music. He's never played classical guitar. He's never done classical training and things like that. But every day he shows up and they're just going, so how do you know how to do this? He's like, because I put myself in spaces to learn. And they're like, explain that. And he's like, well, I was a good enough musician that they let me play in a musical. And so he's played in Rent. He played in Bonnie and Clyde. He played 7 instruments in Bonnie and Clyde. He plays these musicals. He's learning. Like they're like, hey, you've got to learn to read music. He went and got a job that with a musical that he would have to learn how to read music so that he could start learning how to read music. And then he shows up and they're going, okay, your music reading needs to be a little bit better. He's like, well, I don't read music. But every time they're going, well, what? And it's this learning. And he continually put himself in places, and he's not playing Broadway. He's not playing barter theater. He's playing local community theaters, but he's sitting with talented musicians. He's sitting in spaces where he gets a chance to take what he's learning one day and apply it that night, that afternoon when he's sitting in a space. And every time I see him turn a corner, those things pay off to where he gets a chance to be a part of something else that gives him a chance to grow. And it's like, he's like, man, I grew so much from sitting in that. It was really not my dream world, but it has so prepared me for what's next. And I doubt there are any college kids that are sitting out here listening to our podcast, and I definitely think we lost them with the Elvis stuff early on. But man, if there is somebody that's there, or if you're parenting a college kid, I'm just telling you, as a dad who's raising someone, not pastoring, but I mean, he's not pastoring, but he is a kid who makes disciples, who loves following Jesus. And we see the tensions and the struggles of that every day for a 20-year-old that's in a liberal arts music program. And so he sits in this space, but he goes in, he works hard, he puts in the time, and he is able to kind of build these relationships and these opportunities because he understands that his first gig is not going to be standing and opening for John Mayer or Ed Sheeran. It's going to be playing at a local coffee shop, sitting around and 30 people drinking coffee going, man, I wish they would turn his mic down because we're trying to have a conversation here. He understands what it is, and he takes what's there because what the calling is for him is so much more than just going, well, I'm not going to touch it until I get to do it at the level I want to do it at. And we have to force him to go to bed and get rest. We have to force him to kind of step away from some things sometimes so that he can build community and friendships because he's so committed to developing and growing. And I just think that's something that, I don't know. Again, I'm raising a 20-year-old. So it's not like I'm going, well, when my kids and I'm 100 and I'm looking at my 50-year-old, 60-year-old kids and going, hey, this is what they were doing. This is a 20-year-old kid. And I put the same pressure on a 17 to 16-year-old. And I hate to say it that way. I think there is a level of parenting that we're guiding. I should say guiding, not pressure, but put the same guidance into my younger kids of, you need to understand A plus B will equal C, but you can't skip one of those two. Or you can't subtract instead of add. You can't divide instead of multiply and get to the results you want. It's just not going to happen. And so, sorry, that was a side rant on that. That just breaks my heart that that's where schools and I hate to say a generation because I'm raising a kid who's a part of that generation who's not thinking that way. And I know you are as well. I just hate that we're that place with what seemingly be what seems to be, in my opinion, one of the most important jobs, which is leading and shepherding a congregation, a flock. And I don't know if it's entitlement. I don't know if it's the school trying to protect these kids or whatever, but it just seems bad to me.
We've talked before. We've talked many times before. The fact that all the statistics that you see will tell us that 80% of Bible college and seminary graduates who go into vocational ministry, 80% will completely leave ministry within 5 years. And I think it's because exactly what we're talking about here. They're not getting any experience before. So they go to Bible college or seminary thinking this is what they want to do because they had an amazing church that they grew up in. They had a great youth pastor, a great pastor growing up, and they think this is what I want to do. They go, they spend all the money to get trained into that, and then they actually go out and get into the job and see that this isn't summer camp every day. This isn't what it looks like on Sunday mornings from the pulpit. There's 6 other days of the week that go into this, and it's hard. And they didn't experience that before they spent $80, $90, $120,000 and 5, 6, 7 years of their life training for that. And they get into it and realize, man, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I thought. I had many friends that the first ministry experience that they had outside of their local church was the required summer internship that is a Bible ministry major at the school that I went to that you're required to do after your junior year. And so many of them came back from that and said, this was a horrible experience. I don't want to do this, but they're too far in now. They've already got 3 years. They're going into their senior year. They're not going to change their major now. They feel stuck. And so I wish that our Bible colleges and seminaries would make it a requirement. If this is what you want to do, give them credit for it. You know, make it like a work study type thing. Maybe they're not getting paid, but maybe they're getting 3 credit hours a semester to go and be actively involved in a local church, a local congregation, to where they're getting that hands-on experience and seeing, is this really what I want? Because more often than not, it's not what they think it's going to be when they get, well, statistics tell us that that's the case, that it's not what they think it's going to be when they get in. And not only would that help our local congregations, but I think it would greatly benefit the men and women that we're training up to go into ministry. Hey, so we've talked a lot about staffing for staffing for survival so far. We're going to take a break and come back next week and talk more about staffing for growth. And then we're going to give some metrics on some practical tips on how you can know where your church is at and what that looks like for your church. So we do want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Small Church Podcast. And we want to invite you to join in on the conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on church staffing for growth versus staffing for survival, where you're at, what you've experienced, what your church is doing. And if you're just sitting there listening and saying, hey, I would love to get involved with the church, we've got lots of churches that are hiring. So reach out to us. You can find us at hireministries.com or find us on social media at Hire Ministries. Be sure to like our podcast, subscribe to our podcast, and share our podcast with anyone that you know that likes podcasts, or even if they don't, just go ahead and send it to them. We're sure that they would love to tune in and listen. Also want to invite you to be sure to come back next week. Our podcast drops every Tuesday at 6 a.m. for part 2 of the discussion on staffing for survival versus staffing for growth. We want to thank you for listening and being a part of our show today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation next week on the Small Church Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.